There's something about games that fascinates me. It's not just the hours of life they have me putting into playing them, it's something about them. Something I'll never fully be able to explain its complete totality. The way they speak, the way only a game could speak. The way it reaches into your soul, that and its ability to let you reach out to it yourself. Games give us a landscape where we can unleash our soul, let it play without any restrictions. They offer a world where we can explore and cultivate parts of ourselves real life wouldn't give us the opportunity to. They let us exist in settings that are different to real life, with challenges and triumphs unique to them. Maybe you need to build a community that can survive a zombie apocalypse like in State of Decay. Maybe you're learning the art of naval warfare and assassination in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Or you're staring down actual war like in COD, Battlefield, or even Battlefront. You're not doing half of this in real life, if any at all. But in a game, you've done it. Just having that ability to exist in a setting other than real life, it gives us the ability to explore ourselves in a different setting. But there's one catch, one that predisposes a certain part of us to come out, and not everything laying dormant inside of us should be awakened. When we play a game, we play from a position of power. As much as we can immerse ourselves into these worlds, as much as we can feel the stakes of them as if they were real, they're not, and we are never actually at risk or in any real danger. There are certain experiences, like an Old West shootout, which would make me shit myself in real life, but in a game they have me craving for more, disappointed when the last body hits the floor because I know it's the end of the fight. It's easy to love a fight when you aren't actually getting hit or shot. A game isn't real, and pain, dying, it doesn't matter. If our character dies, we can respawn. We'd rather not, but it's not like they're never coming back. If we shoot a random NPC, we haven't actually shot anyone. We've done no real harm, and it doesn't actually matter. But we have fed the part of our brain that wants to do that. In a game, we've got used to not thinking twice. Games expose us to the darker sides of our humanity. There's something inside of me that wants the catharsis of a Wild West shootout or a saloon brawl. A game lets me do that, and I've got a taste for it. I grew up doing this on Red Dead 1, and it never crossed my mind how bloodthirsty I was, because I wasn't actually doing anything except sit in front of a screen, but fuck knows what was going on inside my head. There's no consequence for causing harm in a game. Because of that, it's hard for us as players not to descend into random acts of mayhem because fuck it, why not? There was never a second thought when I did it, never really a thought at all, except the thought of doing it and the excitement of thinking about it. But then, I played Red Dead 2. For the first time ever in a game, I find myself not asking why not, but instead asking why. Red Dead's a complex game, when you look past the Western anyway. It's bursting with things it wants to say, and of all those things it wants to say, what I hear pulsating through the arteries of its gameplay, its world and its story, is what it's saying about humanity. Restoring our humanity in the middle of a broken world, amidst broken people. Arthur's story is the story of a good man who spent the majority of his life convincing himself he's a bad a man who has spent most of his life and most of the game doing bad things. We don't help, but Arthur is written to have to do bad things. Though we can't escape it, he's a man who doesn't actually know why he does all these bad things, because he's been doing them for so long. But he's a man, as we all know, who has a compulsion of goodness inside him, one that's gnawed away at him every time he has done something bad. A man whose goodness has been twisted by someone else to justify causing harm to others. Arthur does bad stuff because he thinks he needs to. He was taught he needs to help himself and to help others around him. But the life Arthur has been leading, it's taken a toll on his humanity. We see him open up about it to the women in camp. We see it in his eyes in certain scenes, and we see it in his words, his actions, especially by chapter 6. It's that thing inside him telling him to run, to leave the gang behind and go off alone or with Mary or just go somewhere else. He doesn't want to be a bad man. He doesn't want to keep causing the harm he has to as an outlaw and member of Dutch's gang, but he's lived his whole life a member of Dutch's gang. Red Dead's story in its entirety, but definitely towards the latter end of it, it's pushing Arthur to find his lost humanity. It's pushing him to break away from the gang and the life he's only ever known, because he needs to if he's to become the man he could have been without Dutch. Without Dutch's authority, the authority that taught him to be a bad man under the facade that it made him a good man, Arthur's humanity comes out. When he's free from Dutch's morality, free from his responsibility to Dutch, he's free to bring out the man he is, the humanity he spent a lifetime fighting inside of him. When he rides out on solo adventures, meets new people and gradually starts to see the flaws in the morals and philosophy he'd lived by his whole life, when he started seeing the hypocrisy in the one who spouted that very Robin Hood style philosophy to him. As Dutch would say, it's okay that Arthur is killed, it's okay that he's robbed, they're taking from those with plenty to give, and they're using that money to build a land where they can be free from the law, free from society and all the bullshit that was coming in the dawning American civilization, built on greeds, built on appetites. Finding a place to call home away from all that is definitely the dream. It's definitely what Dutch would tell you the dream is, but not even Dutch is actually trying to make that a reality. Dutch wants to fight the brewing capitalist American civilization. Dutch wants to feed his own appetite. Arthur doesn't want to feed his own appetite, but he spent a lifetime being taught how to feed Dutch's. Feeding it by robbing, gunslinging, and everything else. It's become natural to Arthur. One of the most influential missions in the game are those tied to the Downs family, a small-holding farmer family indebted to the gang. Arthur nearly kills Thomas Downs trying to reclaim it, and it's doing that signs his death warrant. But it's also what shows, clear as day, that Dutch's gang does not help the people, and the harm the gang causes isn't just limited to the rich and powerful. Dutch was lying about the dream, about Tahiti, Australia, about his Robin Hood style philanthropic gangster bullshit. He was lying about everything. He was lying to himself, lying to the gang, lying to Arthur, and it took the whole game for Arthur to see that. Across the game, Arthur eventually started to see how the man who taught him this code that he would live his life by would time and time again go against that code, always taking a chance to take revenge on Colm O'Driscoll, even though he's the one saying it's never worth seeking revenge. He uses the natives to fight an army, a people who would be the embodiment of Dutch's philosophy if only he actually believed it himself, because Dutch's philosophy wasn't meant for him. It was a yarn he'd spun to justify his appetite, one that kept the gang in line and kept them by his side, at least until members like Arthur started to see the cracks. It took all of what Arthur went through across the game and the tethers holding the gang together unravelling quicker and quicker for him to turn against Dutch, because Arthur is loyal to Dutch and loyal to Dutch's code. He'd lived a lifetime by that code, done so much off the back of that code, he had that code embedded into him. You can't abandon something that integral to the way you've lived your whole life overnight, and you can't accept that something you've lived your whole life by might be a lie. Morality, philosophy, or whatever you would call this kind of impression, they're tricky like that. Even if you see the shadows in those who spout it, it's hard to undo your mind from living within it, and that seems to get truer the longer you've lived under it, the more embedded these truths have become to you. If you've already spent a long time living by a code, a truth, or whatever like that, like a raised Christian who suddenly moves away and sees life outside of all the rules and beliefs that come with believing in Christianity, you can't abandon that faith, just like them, because it's a faith you were raised to believe. Morals, philosophies, impressions, they entangle themselves with our personality. They shape who we are and how we will become in the future. That's whether we know of them or not. They're ingrained into us, and you can't just undo that. We're taught morality from a lot of places. The people around us, our parents, role models, teachers, society, and pretty much all things that influence us. By the time you see the world from a new lens, or at least given the chance to see it from a new lens, you've already embedded many moral, philosophic, and all sorts of other impressions into your head. It takes a long time and the right kind of experiences to undo all of that. It takes the hours of story and all the shit happening in that story for Arthur to undo all of those impressions left by Dutch. And we see that seed of doubt grow across the hours, weeks and months in game, into a very justified tree. Arthur's justified doing harm for so long because he spent years rationalizing it as something he had to do, but it never feels right to him because something inside of him, something human, leaves a mark on his very soul every time he does. You can numb yourself to it, but you can never bury it. As much as Red Dead's story is about the gang, it's also about Arthur's time away from the gang. All the things Arthur does when he's an individual, all the wacky people he meets, the daft situations he finds himself in, and the talents he discovers in himself for hunting, fishing, dinosaur discovery, card collecting, bounty hunting, book writing, and everything else this guy manages to get up to when he steps away from the commitment he has to the gang, to Dutch. It's that part of the story that shows us and shows Arthur a new lens on life. It's when Arthur moves away from the gang, when he starts exploring the world and himself by himself, that he finds his humanity. It's only then that he's given the chance. It took a terminal illness, a group of people he genuinely cared for suffer for their loyalty to Dutch, and seeing his surrogate father turn his back on those codes that turned Arthur into the bad man he has become by the time we pick up the game, for him to turn away from everything that man had taught him. But it also took those experiences he had with people other than the bloodthirsty men who'd numbed themselves to causing harm that he'd spent most of his life and most of his time with. When new gang members like Charles and Sadie make him think twice about causing harm, these experiences show Arthur how people can be different to how we think they are, and that there are people out there different to those we surround ourselves with, who offer opportunities we forget to imagine because we've started thinking with a limited scope, a scope that gets limited as you fall into a pattern in life, because you live only one way, with the same people doing the same thing. It's weird, because at its core, Red Dead is a tragedy, but it's a very spiritual and humanity rejuvenating experience. It promotes something life-affirming, something that makes people out of these NPCs and makes a message out of the world it's brought to life. And it's clever. You didn't buy Red Dead looking for that experience. You bought an action-adventure game set in the Wild West, but you got so much more than that. It gives you that catharsis, those spaghetti western moments, and that badass cowboy protagonist. It gives you an open world with plenty of radiant and different ways to rob, gunsling, and brawl through the West. But in the end, the game inspires something spiritual. The rejuvenation of something innately human that was hard for Arthur to find, tied to his life in Dutch's gang. Something maybe hard to find in our modern life. But if nothing else, it's something new to games. Though it's been explored more and more lately in games like this, like Cyberpunk, even Jedi Survivor. But in this game, that spiritual rejuvenation comes from a story filled with grit and filled with brutality. It's done in a game that has some of the most cathartic and humanized animations for death, if that makes any kind of sense. But all of that actually pushes this game's spiritual message. I've shot thousands, if not millions, of NPCs in all my years playing games, especially open world games, and more than any in Rockstar games. But Red Dead, it's real, almost too real, but not in a bad way. I actually felt the weight of shooting an NPC. I actually felt bad for doing it. Seeing a man clutching his neck as blood spatters out of it, seeing the fear in the eyes of a horse before it's ripped apart by shotgun pellets because it had the unfortunate disposition of being a much bigger target than the bounty hunter riding it and actually shooting me. Freshly spilt blood drying in the desert plains of New Austin as a man dragging his soon-to-be corpse hoping for something is crawling to anything that might save his life, but it's already been lost. I don't know if that was Rockstar's aim when they added all of this detail, but damn if that's not the impression I took away from it. All of this gore, all of this harm is so jaw-dropping to see when you start playing this game. It's almost addictive, but as the body count piles up, especially the unnecessary body count, you start seeing past your own inner bloodlust, and you start seeing death. Death you caused to NPCs who are nothing but zeros and ones at the end of the day, but somehow feel so fucking human. Mechanically, this game does a great job of reinforcing this message of humanity. Red Dead is a slow game. The Rockstar developers have spent hours coding the fucking balls on a horse to shrivel in the cold. They wouldn't do that if they didn't want you to look at this game, and you can't help but look at it. That scenery, that silence, it speaks for itself. It makes you reflect. Something about the scenery makes me stop. It makes me slow down and it makes me think. Maybe this is me, but whenever I play Red Dead 2, I tend to load up the game for these quiet little trips through the wilderness, inspiring this inner peace in me. The mechanics alone, in my opinion, push this human-focused perspective onto the player even more than the game itself, and all of that scenery that's been handcrafted over fuck knows how many hours. But the story itself is what really flips the way you play this game. It's what inspires you to look twice at the game and the people in the world. It's doing this throughout the story, but it starts off as sprinkles, nudges telling you to do the right thing, helping Sadie at the start of the game, watching the full weight of what she's going through throughout chapter 2 when she's at camp almost trapped in a perpetual inner darkness, taking Jack on a fishing trip, making time to give a child a father, if only for an afternoon, only to have to push him behind your back, armed with nothing but a fishing rod as you were confronted by the gang's existential crisis personified, Pinkerton Agent Milton and Agent Ross. The little nudges, as a story theme, they might go over your head at first, because they come hand in hand with something reminding you to prioritize the gang. The very first mission of the game has you saving Sadie from fuck knows what, but it leads you to her cabin under the pretense of helping your gang. You need food, you need shelter, you need warmth, you need anything. Your gang needs you to find something. When you fish with Jack, you forget that wholesome moment of fishing as you're suddenly wrapped up in a confrontation with the agents that will be the gang's downfall. The story's pace quickly escalates, the gang needs to run, and that, in that moment, is what is running through your head. You put the gang first at the start of the game, you put the gang first for most of the game, but you're actually putting Dutch first. At the end of the game, you're putting the gang first, but not Dutch's gang, the gang of people you know and care for and know deserve better, whether they are part of your gang or they're another human out in the world who was a stranger to Arthur until he got to know them, the Downs woman and her son, and that woman living alone near Annesburg, who by her own admission would have died alone had Arthur not given her the skills she needed to survive. I'm on a tangent, but one of the most humanizing features in this game is the mechanic that lets you talk to NPCs. It's a pretty basic system of 3 options: positive interaction, negative interaction, or antagonistic interaction, that or robbing them. This mechanically simple feature does volumes for bringing these people to life. Those 2 lines of dialogue spoken are enough to humanize the person that otherwise, and maybe still has, ended up dead at the hands of your loaded trigger. It makes you think twice, if nothing else. It definitely makes you feel if it is too late to think twice. Sliding more into that tangent, the camp itself, which has the same level of interactivity as normal NPCs but with far more fleshed out dialogue is the master mechanic for humanizing this game. But the camp isn't humanizing the world, it's humanizing the gang. If you always go back to the camp, it's the gang you'll humanize, not the people the gang harms, not the world itself and all of its weird and wacky people. To humanize the world outside of the gang, you have to step away from the gang. You have to explore the world on your own, stepping away from your responsibility to Dutch and the gang to see the humanity in the game outside of the gang. If you were lulled into that gang-centric mindset, you'll treat the world outside of the gang as hostile. You'll more easily rob, more readily antagonize, and more regularly hurt. You might miss that Downs mission in Annesburg in Chapter 6, the veteran's entire questline and that woman's in the cabin, but you will have spoken to half the people in your gang hundreds of times before even unlocking those missions. The message comes full circle at the end of the story, with the game practically screaming its message of kindness at you, shouting at you to slow down. Arthur's fate is sealed, but there is so much left for him to do before he meets that fate, so much left for him to redeem inside that soul. I mentioned earlier how we had to fight for our character's life in the game, not our actual life. In Arthur's story, that actually worked out well for the message the game is trying to push. None of us want Arthur to die, but it wasn't us who was actually going to die at the end of the game. No matter how much we gave a shit, and we all gave a shit, swallowing the immensity of Arthur's death is easier than swallowing the immensity of our own death. It was easier to invest ourselves in those side missions, despite the looming cloud hanging over Arthur's fate. The humanizing missions that open up only in Chapter 6. You can't even meet the veteran and start his set of missions until then. It's easy to still enjoy our time with Arthur, even if the clock is counting down. It's not our clock that is counting down. It might be hard to forget that when we're so immersed in his story, but we do manage to enjoy those moments, just like Arthur, and we haven't had to overcome anywhere near the kind of cloud he would have had to enjoy those moments. Red Dead's story alone does an amazing job of humanizing the rest of the world, but it only scrapes the tip of the iceberg in every way this game humanizes this world. You have to explore the world of Red Dead to see what it has to offer. When you do explore it, you feel this message at its core. Humanize yourself and humanize others. Forgo the debts of people who owe to the gang. What do you need it for by this point? And leave Dutch and his crusade behind. Help the people you can before you meet the end you can't escape. Die, but on your own terms. For a long while, Red Dead's story is the story of Dutch's gang. That's the story we get invested in, and the game does a masterful job of investing us in the gang's story, and a masterful job of making us feel a part of the gang's story. Murder, robbery, camaraderie, all of it is there, but that's not the story of Red Dead. It's the story of Arthur, the man who was a core part of this gang, but the one who finds his humanity when he pushes against it, when he steps out into the world as an individual and not a part of Dutch's gang. But do you know the most humanizing part of the game? It's Arthur. He isn't coming back after the end. There's no respawning your way out of Red Dead's ending. How many deaths have we inflicted across our playthroughs? How many people, like Mrs. Downs, have we left to mourn someone who was once here but is now suddenly not? The way the game pulls at your heart, showing the effects of death on these characters is one thing, but it ripped ours out when it killed the person we'd invested hundreds of hours into getting to know. When I come back to Red Dead, I don't come back to Arthur, I come back to John. Even 6 years after that first time I saw Arthur die, I still haven't forgotten how Arthur's clothes don't fit the same, Arthur's gun doesn't shoot the same, the journal entries and not so artistic pictures don't feel the same, the world doesn't feel the same. Playing Red Dead after Arthur's death, even if you play through again playing as him, savouring every last moment like a wine that sips like it's from Olympus itself, you know it never tastes the same. Once you know, you can't forget. What I'd give to play Red Dead again for the first time, to slow down and savour that game as if I knew I should, but didn't know the reason why I should. I can't do that in Red Dead, but I can do that in real life. It's easy to do the opposite, especially when you play a game, sprinting through the main story, gunning down your problems without hesitation, and it's easy to do that in real life, though less the gunning side of things. But it's easy to embody that same feeling that makes us gun down our problems in a game. It comes from separating ourselves from the world, from closing down on it. Arthur finds his humanity when he expands his world beyond the gang, when he actually meets people who aren't outlaws, when he finds actual hobbies, actual interests outside of the ones he'd explored before, when he learned, despite all the shit, to savour the moments, to care for people and to enjoy them. Slow down, savour that ride, hunt, fish, walk, fucking saunter through the fields or do whatever the modern day real life equivalent is. I don't know, but I feel the message. Savour those little moments, humanise the people around you. Life is beautiful. People are beautiful, but life is finite and people are fragile. Life is dangerous, but living is everything. We need to savour this life as if we were playing that second playthrough of Red Dead, because when the time comes, as it did for Arthur, it'll come too soon. Once it comes, everything changes, but until it comes, anything can be changed.